And I'm Doc from the Air Zoo as well.
And we're going to talk about eyeballs. Really important, and guess what? This is how big your eyeball is. About the size of a ping pong
It's
ball.
about this human eyeball, about that size. Yes.
I have this beautiful model here, so let's just take piece by piece. So on the outside of the eyeball, covering that extra hole that maybe you didn't even know about, the cornea. So it's kind of like this protective cup. Keeps your eyeball from getting too bunged up, and also sometimes it needs extra repair. And so the light travels through it and into the hole in your eye.
Now, the cornea can also be used for helping to focus the light as it comes in. If we get a little bend in it, we get what we call astigmatism. That's going to blur the vision, and that's through the cornea.
Cool. So you can correct that with special lenses,
Yes,
like
you can.
Doc and I both wear. And then once the light passes through the hole in the eye, it goes through the lens here. And cool thing about the lens, maybe you're familiar with using a magnifying glass and you kind of move it closer or further away depending on what you're trying to focus on. But the lens of your eye can actually change shape.
It can.
And the muscles that do that work, the iris. So we always think of the iris as the beautiful part of your eye, so brown or blue or green, and we don't really necessarily think about it as being a hard-working muscle. But it is doing hard work, and it is actually making your pupil, the hole in your eye, bigger or smaller. And behind the iris muscle is another set of muscles, the ciliary muscles, right?
Yes.
And they hold the lens in place.
Right.
And they do the work of kind of changing the shape of the lens so you can focus on different things.
Yes, as they contract and expand, the lens will stretch out or get smaller, and that will focus the light better back on the back of the eye.
So the light continuing on, so it's gone through the cornea, it's gone through the pupil and the beautiful iris, and it's gone through the lens held in place by the ciliary muscles, and then is the eyeball itself. And the eyeball itself is filled with this kind of gooey fluid, which we'll see a little bit more about, that helps the eyeball keep its shape. And then at the back of the eyeball, you can't really see it well here in my model, is the special tissue where a lot of critical things are happening. It's called the retina. And in our eye dissection that we're going to do later, it kind of looks a little bit like brown tissue paper, but it's laying on the back of your eyeball, and it's packed with really helpful cells called rods and cones that help you see light and also color. And say a little bit more about the retina, Doc. I know you've had some experience with it.
Well, the retina is covered with a bunch of little blood vessels that helps to nourish them. And this is the only part in the body where we can actually see a living, active blood vessel without having to open up the body anywhere. So we can check for hypertension and numerous other different type of circulatory disorders, as well as optic disorders. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a glue-like material between the
sclera, the retina and the sclera.
And the sclera. And sometimes this will come apart and the retina will actually come away, and we call this a retinal detachment. And it's quite easy to fix. But that pretty well explains the retina.
And so the retina is where the light is being focused onto, and it has these specialized cells, and it's basically collecting all the information that your eye is gathering for your body. But that's not really where the vision happens. For vision to actually happen, all of that information has to travel through this special nerve at the back of the eyeball called the optic nerve. It's kind of a thick, protected cord, and that directs all the information to your brain, which does a lot of heavy lifting when you're seeing things. So you could have a completely functioning eyeball, but if you have issues with the optic nerve, you won't be able to see. Or you can have issues in the areas where the sight is processed in your brain, and that can also cause you to have problems with sight. So it's kind of a really nifty structure. And we didn't really talk about the outside of the eyeball that much, but let's just give a minute to that. So the eyeball itself, the white of your eye, is actually this really tough sac called a sclera, and it kind of keeps your eyeball in its nice shape, and it's actually moved around in your eye with these muscles. So the next time your teenager maybe rolls their eyes at you, you can thank their ocular muscles. And there are animals that don't have those muscles, like owls. They actually have to move their head to look around. They can't move their eyeballs without moving their head. So it's a really nifty structure.
Another interesting thing about the optic nerve, you can see it on here, this is where the blood vessels also enter the inside of the eye.
Pretty cool. Anything else we want to say about the eyeball?
Yes, there's a little dent right here. I don't know if you can see it on the film, but this is called the cup. And this is where most of the focusing in the on the retina takes place. And then there's the nerves will go from there into the optic nerves.
There's one other structure that I wanted to mention that we humans don't have, but some of the critters that we look at do have. There's an extra layer in the back of the eye called the tapetum lucidum, and it's kind of this iridescent color, and it helps animals see in the low light conditions. It helps the light bounce around a little bit more on your eyeball, so it has more chance to get picked up by the retina. And so we'll see that when we look in a real cow eye, but it's the reason that animals like cats and dogs and deer, their eyes glow green when you flash light on them at night. That's what you're seeing as the reflection off of the tapetum lucidum. So it's kind of neat.
Yeah, but, these animals cannot see in the utter darkness. There has to be a bit of light, and it just helps to amplify what light they are getting.
It helps them in kind of low light conditions, like when the sun's just coming up or just having set.
Exactly.
So, cool. Well, should we look at some real eyes?
Yes, let's take a look.
All right, I got a cow eye right here, just ready for us.
Okay.
All right, so here is a real cow eye. And it looks somewhat like the model, but there are some differences. So, for example, the cornea, that kind of clear protective cup on the outside of your eyeball, it doesn't look clear in this one because of the preservative used, but it is there. You can see this cow had brown eyes, and you can see, let's look at the back, you can actually see the optic nerve. That's where the signal is going to travel to the brain. And I have actually incised around, so let me open it the rest of the way up. Kind of cut the last little bit. So I'm cutting through, remember what that white part is called? The sclera. It's kind of a tough tissue, and it's made a little bit tougher by the preservative. To be careful, this is sharp. Okay, let's open it up. All right. And you can see there's this sort of jelly-like substance that's clinging to the inside of the eyeball. That is called the vitreous humor. And humor is a word that means liquid. It's just a fancy word that means liquid. But it's kind of like jelly, and I will kind of push it out of the way so you can see it a little bit better. Kind of gross, but that's why you wear gloves.
In my early times of working this, I couldn't understand why they would call it humor, because it doesn't seem to be very funny to me.
Yeah, it's like one of those Latin fun words.
Yes. Actually, it's Greek.
Oh, is it Greek? Oh, thanks for
Medicine is in
learn
Greek.
something every day. All right, so you can also see the lens on the inside of the cow eye. And again, because of the preservative, it is not clear and it is no longer very flexible, but I'll pop it out so you can kind of see it a little better. So here is the lens. So compare to our model. And if you were able to zoom in really close, you can see, can you see the hole in the middle of the eye? I'll point to it with my probe, right here. And that is, of course, the pupil. And you can, it's hard to see, but you can still see it. You can see kind of surrounding the pupil is the iris, that in the case of the cow eye, brown colored tissue. And then the layer of muscle that kind of held that lens in place and changed its shape is here. Perfect. So that's kind of the top part of the eye, and I'll just kind of show it to you again. So now that I've popped the lens out of place, you can probably see the pupil a little bit more clearly. So some of the tissue changes texture and color a little bit because of the preservative, but you get the gist of it. So there's the front part of the cow eye, and here is the back part. And again, there's some of that humor. And then you see this tan-colored tissue here. That is the retina, and I'm going to kind of pull it away. So you can kind of see that it's a layer. That is the tissue that has the specialized rod and cone cells that help you detect light and color. And it's just kind of plastered to the back of the eye, laying there in place until we disturb it. But if I peel it away, let me do that. Get a little bit gory here. It's got one place where it's attached, so I'm going to use my forceps to kind of get a little brute force on it. And peel it away so we can see that specialized structure that some creatures have. Look at that sort of iridescent coating there, and that is the tapetum lucidum. That's that part of the eye that cows and deer and cats and dogs have that help them see better in low light conditions. And it reflects back kind of as green if you're looking using a flashlight in the middle of the night. So it's kind of really cool looking. To me, it kind of reminds me of a shell.
Why is it humans don't have that?
Well, I think that's because we weren't traditionally active when it was starting to get dark, so we didn't need it. Like animals like deer, who feed a lot during those times of the day, need. So humans don't have it, but a lot of other animals do. And I won't peel it away, but there is a little bit more tissue underneath that has more of the blood vessels and whatnot. And again, let me show you. So after the light will have passed through the eyeball and been collected on the back, on that retina, on this tissue here that just looks like wet brown tissue paper now, then it will go through the optic nerve at the back of the eyeball to get processed by the brain. So there it is. That's the cow eye, and very similar to a human eye, except for that tapetum lucidum. It's pretty similar in size and kind of overall structure.
Even the texture, if you squeeze it, you can feel how it's the human eye would. I'm glad I'm using this hand for that and this one for my eye.
Cool. So that's a little bit more about how your eyeball works and a little bit about eyeball structure. And hopefully you weren't too grossed out by it, but I always find that the science kind of makes up for the slight ew factor of it. All right, so there you have the eye. Not super complex in terms of numbers of structures, but it's amazing the things that it can do with the help of your brain. We have such powerful ability to focus up close, focus far away, take in things that are happening in the corners of our eye, make automatic adjustments to the amount of light. Think about with your camera how much work you have to do to capture a perfect image, and your eye does it pretty effortlessly with the help of your brain. It's really cool.